Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Andrew Erickson and by Jake Ciely from The Athletic. Guys, we are talking about wide receivers. We're going through the top 60-ish, basically our top 6 tiers on the consensus rankings. That's fantasypros.com/rankings. We're using the half PPR rankings just as kind of a standard way to go through that. All of our consensus rankings and tiers can be found, again, at that link, fantasypros.com/rankings. And it's going to be kind of a fun, casual show. I love doing these types of shows. We've done them for other positions. It's basically just kind of going through and reacting to the rankings as they have been put together by the consensus from the industry and saying, you know, these guys are too high or too low within their tiers. These guys are in the wrong tier. They should be higher or lower. So we'll kind of go through, just react, to everything as we see it and see what we think about receivers, which is clearly a very important. They're all important positions, but, clearly one of the big positions to get right on draft day. Before we head well into August now, Jake, what do you got going on at The Athletic?
Yeah, well into the draft kit, as everybody is. The rankings, projections, everything's out or starting by positions, but not even over at The Athletic. The podcast is back. So, yeah, the all-in speed run now, 15-minute podcast. Basically, a lot of stuff we talk on here, so catch it there. Same thing we're doing here. Like, I'll have guests from you guys over there. So if you're doing one, you might as well subscribe to both, right?
Speaking of the speed run, you were just talking about listening to podcasts at 2x speed. I can't imagine how quickly you would get through your own podcast at that speed.
I actually thought about putting up 2 versions where I already have it at 1.5 speed for everybody.
Yeah, that's not something I can. My brain is not wired to listen to stuff too quickly. So a speed run podcast sounds perfect for me. Listening to it at normal speed. Erickson, anything you're working on here as we are getting in the middle of August?
Just keeping up to date with all the news. We have injuries. We have preseason usage that we're trying to see what matters, what doesn't matter. So just trying to drink from the fire hose that is the NFL right now, trying to stay everything up to date. So whenever your draft is, that you are ready and locked and loaded.
And annoy the wife with puns, we found out before we started the show.
Yes.
That's true. That's the whole year, though. That's not just specific to August.
Yes. What Jake is referring to is I was using the upstairs restroom, and she was like, "Why are you using every single bathroom in this house?" Again, I have a house now, so I have multiple bathrooms as opposed to just one. And I'm like, well, I'm just getting my exposures of different restrooms in the house. So just like
Erickson's a best ball, bro, for sure. All right, let's dive into the show here because we got a lot of names to get through. Tier 1, starting right off at the very top. Will surprise nobody. Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson are the 3 names. I was a little surprised, not shocked, not jaw on the floor, but a little surprised that Lamb is ahead of Jefferson. I agree with that ranking, actually. I would have Lamb as my wide receiver 2, but I just kind of assumed he would be 3 and Jefferson would be 2. Obviously, everybody in the world is going to have Jamar Chase number 1 pretty much. Jake, were you surprised to see this order? Do you agree with this order? Are these the only 3 names that should be in this tier? I'm assuming you wouldn't knock any of them out, but would you add any names to this group?
So, no, not surprised. Yes, would have the same ones. Yes, would have the same order. No, I would not add anybody to this group. So there you go.
Nice
I got all
simple.
your questions.
Yeah.
Shotgun the questions. I get all of them. Actually, my tiers, I have Chase in a 1 of 1. I have him by himself because I really think that you could argue he's the first pick in the draft. In fantasy drafts, I think you can argue that he has the floor and the upside, that there is still risk with Lamb and Jefferson. I know that we're going for Lamb, and this reason I have him over Jefferson is because you go back to 2 years ago, Lamb was 20 points per game. Jefferson hasn't approached that yet, and Jefferson hasn't approached that yet even before we're talking about McCarthy. And I know we've seen Jefferson do this with Mullins and terrible quarterbacks, but I think that, we have to associate some risk here, and that if Dak is 100% healthy, and Dak did look poor last year, even with some of those injuries before that. But I think they're in the same group. They both have the upside to be the number 2 wide receiver, but they both have a little bit more risk than they normally would. And that's really why I would separate Chase. But those are the big 3. And if you started a draft with those 3 before you even talked about running back, I wouldn't even have a problem with it.
Yeah, Erickson, what do you think? I know we've talked before about the idea of you could define a tier as the only people you could make a reasonable case for taking. Like, if you can't make a reasonable case for taking somebody over somebody else, and they don't belong in the same tier. So by that logic, maybe Chase does belong in his own tier, because I don't think you will see anybody taking anybody, any receiver over him. But these other guys are really, really good and clearly deserving of a top half of the first round pick. So how do you see it, Erickson?
see exactly the same way you guys have talked about it in kind of their tier of their own and kind of putting Chase in that 1A tier because, like you said, we don't see a scenario where you're going to be ranking or drafting CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson over Jamar Chase unless you're just going to buy into, well, we haven't had a lot of wide receivers finish as a wide receiver one in back-to-back years. Like, that's like the main argument against Chase. Oh, well, it just doesn't happen that often. But if anything, this year would be the year to bet on that happening because it's not just Chase, it's the Joe Burrow-Chase combination. Like, we talk about where are these other guys' quarterbacks being drafted? Like, well outside the top 100 picks. Like, Dak is on that QB1 fringe. McCarthy's a little bit farther down as well as more of an unproven asset. And then you have Joe Burrow, who we can all agree is the best pocket passer and the reason why he's the most expensive non-mobile quarterback. It's the combination of Chase and Burrow that makes Chase in his own tier.
I actually don't think the gap between Burrow and Dak is that wide in terms of supporting a fantasy wide receiver. Like, they are both more than good enough for an elite wide receiver to be wide receiver one in the season. So, like, to me, the quarterback conversation is more relevant when talking about Jefferson. I don't actually see that wide a gap between Burrow and Dak for the purposes of this conversation. But it is, a tiebreaker. Or not. I mean, not that they were tied anyways, but like it is a smaller additional factor in his favor. I want to ask before we move off this tier. Jake, you said that you could justify these being the first three names off the board before any running backs, and that would make sense. Let's say Chase goes 1 and Bijan goes 2. You're on the clock at 3. Are you going with Gibbs or are you going with CeeDee Lamb?
Neither. I'm the one that's still going Barkley.
Okay, I was gonna. I should have asked Erickson because I know Erickson wouldn't be taking Barkley, but yeah.
Yeah, and I know Joe's sitting somewhere yelling at us right now because he's going to come for us with those numbers. There's plenty of numbers where you can go both ways. The numbers are more damning the one way than the other with the 400 touches, but actually just the day that we're recording this, I tweeted out the fact that over the last 3 years, interesting enough, like as in pure touches, this doesn't completely fall into the 400 touch range, but there's only been one running back inside the top 25 in fantasy points per game that has failed to play 10 games. For everybody that's concerned with running back injury risk, it's not as great as we think. And it was Breece Hall back in 2022. Everybody else has played 10-plus games. And the average games played, I was shocked when I saw this number. The average games played for a top 25 points per game, not top 25 overall, points per game running back the last 3 years, 14 and a half games. I was shocked by that number. So I'm saying all that to say is, like, we can play the injury risk game, and I know that the 400 touches are why people are concerned about Saquon Barkley, but I'm just not going to try and predict this. I'm just not going to try and predict injury that it hits this year. It didn't for Derrick Henry before, so I'm still taking Barkley. I don't think anything's changed in this scenario outside of maybe the Lane Johnson injury comes into play, but even so, I'm just not going to knock him down.
Erickson, I know you're not taking Barkley, so Gibbs or who? I think Lamb is your wide receiver 2, not Jefferson. So Gibbs or Lamb if you're on the clock at number 3.
I think I'm probably going to still go with Gibbs. That's probably the situation that I would go into. I think that the top of the receiver pool is a little bit deeper than the running back pool. So if I can lock in Gibbs as my hero RB and then worry about the other positions, get some elite guys, that's probably the approach that I would use.
Get in the game. Best Ball is live at DraftKings. $15 million is on the line with real stakes and real excitement. Best Ball is the biggest fantasy contest at DraftKings. We're talking a $15 million guaranteed prize pool with 2 millionaires being crowned for first and second place. Play season-long fantasy football the DraftKings way. With Best Ball, there's no waiver wires and no roster management. You get bigger rosters so injuries won't end your season. Just draft your team and you're set. If a shot at winning a share of $15 million isn't enough to get you excited, check this out. DraftKings is offering everyone a draft one, get one special. Your $20 entry fee scores you a bonus ticket. Download the DraftKings app and use code FANTASYPROS. That's code FANTASYPROS for all customers who enter the NFL Best Ball $15 million millionaire contest to get a bonus ticket and get a shot at being crowned one of 2 millionaires only on DraftKings. All right, tier number 2 here. This one is a little bit bigger than tier 1. It's guys that are, back half of the first round, early part of the second tends to be where they're going. It runs from wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 10. Malik Neighbors, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London, and A.J. Brown. Erickson, there are names in this list that I am not getting a lot of in drafts because I just like the other names better. For example, I'm really high on Nico Collins this year. I'm a little concerned about Matt Stafford's, back injury stuff and just Puka's general injury history. So I've been taking Nico ahead of Puka. That means I'm not getting a lot of Puka because it's not like Puka's then falling back to my next pick. So there are names in here that I feel like I don't have a ton of exposure to, but I do like all of them. Like in their own ways, all of these names are very fun, exciting, strong fantasy picks you can make in the right part of the draft. So when you look at this group, does anybody stand out to you as this is somebody that you really want out of this group? This is somebody that you're not getting a lot of out of this group? Or is it kind of just how the board falls to you?
Well, it's kind of like your shoot your shot type of wide receiver tier, because it's the reason why round 1 is so deep this year, because we're seeing round 1 wide receiver talents fall to the back end of round 2 because of this tier of receivers. I think that you can make a strong case for a lot of these guys finishing inside the top 3, if not number 1 overall. Look at Malik Neighbors. If he's healthy, is he not going to lead the NFL in terms of raw volume, in terms of total targets, receptions? Now it's a matter of, does he get the yardage and touchdowns to kind of put him over the top? Puka Nacua, we know, is an absolute monster, especially with Matthew Stafford, what we've seen with him second half of last year as a rookie, what he did. He's entering his third year where we see a lot of receiver breakouts. Is Puka Nacua just scratching the surface? So it's a really exciting tier. But for me, when I just think about the cost and the upside and the projection for this season, my guy's Drake London. That's the guy that I want the most. And when I'm setting up where I'm going to be drafting, if I get to pick my draft position, I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, how can I ensure that I get Drake London in round 2 or at the end of round 1? Where do I need to pick based on my site's ADP to make sure that I can get Drake London, even if I take him a couple spots ahead of ADP? It's because he's had a massive red zone role since he entered the NFL, the highest red zone target rate among wide receivers the last 3 seasons. And I think Michael Penix is a wide receiver elevator. We saw what he did at Washington. He made a lot of these receivers look really good. And when they all went to the NFL, they weren't that good their rookie season. So Michael Penix, I think, is going to elevate this offense. I think he's going to feed Drake London in the red zone. And the number 1 wide receiver the last 6 seasons, wide receiver 1 overall, has led the NFL in red zone targets. Last year it was Jamar Chase. Cooper Kupp did it a couple years ago. So for me, Drake London is a guy I think that can make that level jump with an upgraded quarterback with Penix. So he's the guy that I'm always circling and the guy that I probably want the most from this tier.
Jake, I think you're also a Drake London guy too, right? If you had to pick one player in this tier that was a tier 1 guy a year from now, let's set aside Neighbors because I think a lot of people pick him. Setting aside Neighbors, would London be that for you?
It would be, and I'm actually ending up a lot with St. Brown and London. One thing that Andrew said that was kind of baked into his argument there is I go back to Chase and the Lamb situation, even before that with the Cooper Kupp, Antonio Brown's, Devontae Adams season. There's generally only 1, maybe 2 wide receivers that have a huge gap over the rest. The top crust of wide receivers are generally in that 17 to 18 point range, and there you might see 1 or 2 hit about 19 to 20 points. Last year was Chase. The reason last year is such an outlier is because it was an outlier. It was the first time in a long time where we've had a 3-point gap from the first to the second wide receiver. And then those second wide receivers were both hurt last year, in Rashee Rice and Chris Godwin. So most years it's 1 or 2 guys and then a very big group, like we're talking about from 4 to 10 of all these guys that are averaging 16 points per game. St. Brown feels like the safest to me. I know a lot of people for 2 years ago were like, well, what if there's regression? And then last year, they're like, there was receiving regression. Well, now what if there's touchdown regression? And how about just St. Brown? St. Brown, he's fine. He's going to average his 15, 16 points per game. But what you're asking and what Andrew was kind of saying there is find who's in this group that could hit that top tier. Who's, if everything cracks right, can get to 19 points plus per game. I think it's London, and I'm not a Neighbors guy because of his quarterback situation, but if I'm wrong and Russell Wilson revitalizes his career or Dart takes over sooner and looks anything like he did in that preseason game, and all of a sudden Neighbors walks into 160 targets with production increase on a per target basis, Neighbors could be in that group too. So you got to back into the question you started with here is, out of this group, who's the narrative of your guy? Take any of them. You could argue for any of them, but what's the narrative for your guy to get to 19 points? If you don't think they're getting to 19 points, then probably just wait and see who is there in round 2.
I think Nico belongs in that conversation as well because he was doing that before his injury last year. Those first 5 weeks of the season, he was insanely good. And I'm hoping the offensive line is better this year. It remains to be seen. It's at least going to be different this year. So,
well, here's one for you: C.J. Stroud to Nico Collins, the highest yards per route run of players that play significant snaps. highest when under pressure. CJ Stroud to Nico Collins, and that's one thing you don't have to worry about. If he's still under pressure this year, you're still good with your Nico Collins pick.
I just really think I think Nico is like a top 5 receiver in football, and he's paired with a good young quarterback. I'm really all over him. I want to, before we move off this tier, Erickson, Neighbors. It's interesting because I do think he belongs at the top of this tier, just given the insane volume we expect, and he's insanely talented as a receiver. Yeah. But he is the only guy here who, assuming health for a guy like Stafford, who we have serious question with. The other quarterbacks here, not that they're all elite, but Matthew Stafford, C.J. Stroud, Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts, Michael Penix, who we like as kind of a wide receiver supporter. Like, Neighbors is the only guy with this major quarterback question mark, and yet he is at the top of the tier and like kind of a consensus top of this tier.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting because it is so blatantly obvious that the quarterback play would be what holds Malik Neighbors back. But in the pro argument for Malik Neighbors would be, is the quarterback play still not better than it was last year with the New York Giants? At least that's what the Giants are kind of banking on. They took 3 shots between getting Russell Wilson in there, obviously drafting Jackson Dart, who, again, if Dart is good, then this is untapped potential, and Neighbors is definitely going to hit as even the wide receiver 4. And I mean, the talent profile, no one's going to debate. And I mean, Neighbors is just like a target machine. I think that especially in full PPR, that's even where he's more valuable because of the amount of volume. Like, again, if he doesn't score double-digit touchdowns, then maybe you'll be okay, like by not drafting him and going after one of these other guys that maybe has more double-digit touchdown appeal, especially in the half PPR. But if one of these quarterbacks hit, and I mean, I'm going to be kicking myself when Jameis Winston has a couple of those starts with Malik Neighbors. Those games are going to be absolutely insane. He's Malik Neighbors. I don't even care what week it is. I don't care where they're playing. It's going to be wide receiver 1 in my rankings. Malik Neighbors with Jameis Winston for the 3 weeks that he plays.
That's the point being is like to go back to what I was saying about the 160 plus targets, but needing to be better. Is he had 170 targets last year, but the difference between Chase's 170 targets and Neighbors' 170 targets was the difference of 20 points per game to 14 in change because the touchdown equity. Like, I think he could even be better but he needs the touchdowns. You're talking about 17 versus what was only 7 for Neighbors. So whether it's Dart, Winston, or Wilson, it's kind of the question, do you believe the Giants offense can get Neighbors to even a dozen touchdowns? His talent, yes, 100%. But can their offense get him there? And that's why I'm kind of like that. I have him on the back end of this tier just because I think we're not associating enough risk with him. Like, let me ask you guys, if anybody in this group, to turn the question the opposite way, not assuming health, but if anybody fell out of this tier this year, wouldn't the answer be Neighbors? Doesn't he have the biggest risk of not being in this tier?
I think if you set aside injury, it's Neighbors, maybe Brian Thomas Jr. if you think that Travis Hunter kind of becomes the number 1 in that offense.
And Trevor
like
Lawrence
if he really
never
does play
looks
enough on offense.
But it also, but like when
Thomas
you bring
has
up
only done it 1 year too. Like these other guys have a couple of years of data. Like I don't expect any of them to fall. But if I had to pick one, it's probably Neighbors. Then maybe Thomas.
Well, I guess like for me, like I feel stupid when we talk about Neighbors and Thomas because these are both the guys that broke out as rookies and just like melted faces, and I were like, well, now they're going to be worse. And it's like, wait, that's not how this works. So actually, I would go with one of the old, like, so Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? So does he continue to just do the status quo? That's what Jake thinks. Maybe he does, but it is a new offensive coordinator. Jamison Williams looks like he's going to break out. You know, what if that just eats into Amon-Ra St. Brown just enough where maybe he's closer to wide receiver 15 as opposed to wide receiver 5? Now, it doesn't mean he's like, oh my God, this is the worst pick I ever made, but does he fall out of this tier because of these younger superstars ascending? I think that that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is I don't want to make the case against any of them. Like, you give me any 2 of these guys, if I have a late pick in the first, like, just double up these guys.
It's part of why, too, like, going wide receiver is really enticing this year, too, because you get 2 of these guys that I just – some of these running backs, like, okay, Barkley, McCaffrey, these guys get banged up all the time. So, like, you don't want to deal with it. Like, no, I don't want to deal with these older running backs with all this touch volume. I'm going to take 2 shots at who I think could be wide receiver 1 overall between tier 1 and tier 2. So I think that that's something that people need to kind of open their minds to.
Every time I get asked where do you want to pick this year, I'm like, I want to pick late because I want to get 2 of these guys. Like, yes, early is great. You get Chase or Bijan or whoever, but like, I want to pick late and make sure I get 2 of the top 15 or so picks. And getting 2 of these receivers, I'm gonna feel great about it. All right, let's go to tier 3 here. Some guys that maybe could elevate into tier 2 this time next year. Some young guys here. Also, some old guys, a couple of very old guys here. So it's an interesting mix here. Going from wide receiver 11 to wide receiver 17. Generally, guys going kind of the back half of round 2, deep into round 3 in this range. Ladd McConkey, Jackson Smith and Jigba, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans. So Ladd McConkey year 2, JSN year 3, Garrett Wilson year 3 or year 4. Is he year 3 or 4? I'm forgetting what year he came out.
Garrett Wilson is
but
year 4.
Younger. And then the other guys, Tyreek, obviously, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, all into their 30s. So an interesting, like I said, kind of combination here. Jake, when you look at this tier, what stands out to you more? Are you more interested in those young guys, or do you think that it's maybe some value in the boring veterans?
I think you can say a mix of both, but two things is, one is there's a name that I would include and a name I would take out. The name being the one you weren't sure about, Garrett Wilson, and how long he's been around. I'm just not putting Garrett Wilson in this tier, and it's nothing against Garrett Wilson. Like, I go back to my college when he came out of the draft, my college take on his ability, and Garrett Wilson is Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, though, on a lot of other teams, I would rank in this tier. But I'm not taking away, this is coming from somebody who's also argued that Justin Fields gets too much hate for how he is as a passer. He's not terrible. He's not amazing, but he's also not terrible. He also had DJ Moore finish as a top 20 wide receiver, but that's top 20. That's not wide receiver 1. That's not somebody in this group that, is definitively going to get those 150 plus targets. And I just think that Garrett Wilson is great, but he's better to be in that next tier with DJ Moore and some other names. And I would put Metcalf in this group. Look, I know Aaron Rodgers looks like he's running with weights around his ankles out there, and we're worried, but we're also watching somebody who just helped Devontae Adams come over to this team with Garrett Wilson and post wide receiver 1 numbers once he got there, and Garrett Wilson was still a top 25 wide receiver. Adams actually pushed Wilson aside when he came over. And I just look at it as Aaron Rodgers is going to be Aaron Rodgers. Is fine. He can't move, but he'll still be productive enough that DK Metcalf is his 1. And with very little competition behind him, this is somebody who's arguing for Roman Wilson to say hey, he might finally be the thing that Mike Tomlin saw at the Senior Bowl practice. But it's DK Metcalf walking into 140 plus targets from Aaron Rodgers. Yes, please. He deserves to be in this group. So that's my biggest takeaway is this is another one like the group before where you can nitpick and make the upside case for others. And I'm sure we'll have 1 or 2 break out of this tier and finish higher, and one of those 2 finish lower. But I think Metcalf deserves to be here and Garrett Wilson doesn't. And the one other one I will say, because you talked about his quarterback with Nakua, and I just brought up Adams, I wouldn't bet on it, but I don't think anybody would be floored, falling out of their chair, shocked if we got to the end of the season, even with health for Nakua, Adams finished with a higher points per game. I think there's a non-zero chance that could happen.
I agree, honestly. I'm not sure where to rank Devontae Adams just because there's so many names ahead of him that I like, but I agree with you that upside case is definitely there, pairing up with Stafford, assuming health for him, of course, like you said. Erickson, when you look at this group, what do you think? Do you agree with Jake that Garrett Wilson maybe should be in here? Is there anybody else you would knock out? What do you think about this group?
So I'm actually on the total opposite of the Garrett Wilson, DK Metcalf conversation. So I think that Metcalf should not be anywhere near here. I'm terrified of wide receiver 1s on Arthur Smith offenses. There's one guy that's been able to be good in that situation. His name is A.J. Brown. And I think that Brown is a better yards after the catch guy than DK Metcalf is. And that just concerns me. I think that the tight ends are still going to be involved a lot. I think the Steelers are going to run the ball. I think it's not going to be as much as the Aaron Rodgers offense as it is still the Arthur Smith offense, which hasn't always been the greatest for fantasy pass catchers. So I'm not going to move Metcalf up. Garrett Wilson, for me, I believe he's just going to be the number 1 target on that offense, and it's a matter of what the raw volume ends up turning out like. But I think that Fields showed, at least with DJ Moore a couple years back, that he could elevate a receiver who's had bad quarterback play. They played it together at Ohio State, and there's just no one else in that. Josh Reynolds is a wide receiver too in that offense. Mason Taylor was the tight end we were excited about. He's already injured. He's banged up. So I think Wilson's going to see enough targets where he can potentially elevate himself into this tier. I would say another guy that I thought was actually in my tier 2 before a couple news items was actually Ladd McConkey, who's at the top of this tier. So I had him up in tier 2 before, but then we got the trifecta of bad things happening to him where the Chargers lost their starting left tackle. So the offense, if that's potentially worse, that's not great. Then we had the fact that he's also dealing with another injury where we're not really sure what's going on with his current health. And then they signed Keenan Allen, who I think that doesn't necessarily mean that Ladd is screwed from he's not going to be in the slot as much. He can win outside. He can win both in both areas of the field from the slot or outside. But it's still another guy that is going to command volume in the Chargers offense that I don't think we were really accounting for with the other players between some of the rookies, Quentin Johnston. So I think just all of those factors combining at once did move McConkey down a little bit for me, just how I view him in the tiers, not necessarily dropping in my rankings. But if some of those things hadn't happened, he would have been up closer to tier 2 than in tier 3.
Jake, I wanted to ask you about Ladd McConkey because I feel like most people have him as wide receiver 11. I think there's kind of a consensus top 10, which is the first 2 tiers. And while Ladd is in this tier, not a tier of his own, I do feel like the strong consensus is that he's kind of alone at wide receiver 11. I don't know if you have it differently, but I feel like the gap between him and JSN like really isn't that wide. They're both young guys that people are really excited about this year, and they're going. I feel like whenever Ladd goes off the board, I pretty much see JSN go within a couple of picks, right after him in the drafts I've been in. Do you see those as kind of 2 different players and in different spots of where you want to be drafting them, or are they kind of holding hands for you in your rankings?
No, I've been JSN over Ladd this entire time. This was even before the Keenan Allen thing, and I'd even move Ladd a spot or 2 down. We talked about it last week when I did the mock with the headliners and Joe. But I think the interesting thing with Ladd is just like it's kind of the perception I brought up about Tyrone Tracy and the fact that we see guys surprise us in the NFL / fantasy, and I those go hand in hand in this argument, is that when Ladd McConkey wasn't getting the respect he deserved coming out of college, and then the respect he deserved in fantasy, and the respect he deserved in general, and then all of a sudden he does what a lot of people thought he could do, but it's a surprise to most. You're like, oh my God, like he's so much better than we thought he was, when the truth was he should have been higher rated to start with. And so they kind of get inflated the year after. Is that like I think that Ladd McConkey's ceiling is not much greater than it was last year. And that's not saying that Ladd McConkey's not a great receiver. He is. That's why he did what he did last year. It's just that he's still just that great receiver. He's a different wide receiver than Neighbors and Brian Thomas. He just doesn't have that extra level, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion. Like, he is who he is, which is okay. So that's why I was taking JSN over him. And I think that the point being with Keenan Allen, I think that's more of a death knell to Trey Harris, and the fact that we've also seen some of the camp reports being concerned about Harris's consistency out there, and that the Chargers said, you know what, we're not ready for Harris or Lambert Smith or Quentin Johnston is looking like a bust at this point. Like, nobody's stepping up as the number 2. We need to go make this move. So I'm not that concerned about McConkey. Like I said, I moved him down a spot or 2, but maybe for some people that's more like 4 or 5 because I already had JSN in front of him. I want to come back to one thing because I do want to ask Erickson, because like I'm not saying I'm right and he is wrong. I just don't understand the Garrett Wilson. This is somebody who's never had more than 12 fantasy points per game. Even when DJ Moore had his great season, he had 14 points per game. Like, where is the world where Garrett Wilson gets to be in a wide receiver 1? I just think it's impossible. And that's okay, though, because I just believe Garrett Wilson is essentially DJ Moore. And then for the longest time, DJ Moore was like, you need to put him higher. And DJ Moore's like, okay, guess what? I'll be wide receiver 16 every damn year. And I think that's just what Garrett Wilson is. Like, and so I want to hear the argument for him. And I'm not saying I'm right, you're wrong. Like, I legitimately want to hear like why people believe he can do even better. I just don't see a wide receiver 1 season in his wheelhouse.
Well, all the guy does is get targets. I mean, the last 3, basically since the end of the NFL, the only guys that have more targets than him are CeeDee Lamb and Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams was on his
team last year. So how does that go up?
It's the efficiency that you're betting on. It's let's have a guy in Justin Fields that's better than what we've seen from Garrett Wilson in the past. Again, last year, before they traded for Devontae Adams, you saw when he had better efficiency at the quarterback position, he was a guy that we were excited to play as a back-end fantasy wide receiver. And then they bring in Devontae Adams, and, of course, the targets shift away from Garrett Wilson to Devontae because it's Aaron Rodgers' best friend. So I just think that you're betting on that connection, taking Garrett Wilson to the next level like they did with DJ Moore a couple years back in Chicago.
I just don't see a 3-point per game boost in efficiency with Justin Fields. That's my issue.
Let's go to tier 4 here. We already talked about DK Metcalf. He is in this tier. He's wide receiver 21. This runs from wide receiver 18 to 30, so it's a pretty wide tier. I'll run through the names quickly. Marvin Harrison Jr., Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Cortland Sutton, Devonta Smith, Jamison Williams, Zay Flowers, Tetaroa McMillan, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, Jalen Waddle, and George Pickens. A lot of names, Erickson, that we have talked about on previous shows. Guys like Jalen Waddle, guys like Worthy, guys like Ted McMillan. Those guys are kind of in the back half of this tier. Terry McLaurin obviously dealing with this contract-related stuff. Cortland Sutton did sign a contract. Martin Harrison Jr. really hyped, coming off a down season. Like, a lot of really interesting kind of stories to spin about most of the names in this group. So I'll let you, Erickson, kind of pick the direction we start in. When I read through those 12 or so, 13 names, or however many it was, who's the first one that stands out as this guy is ranked incorrectly, whether it's too high or too low?
A guy that's ranked incorrectly. Let me see. I don't know if I would say anyone's totally in a terrible spot when I'm looking at, because this is like one of those tiers where it's really fun, where you look at a lot of different rankings and it's kind of all over the place, but it's agreed that everyone is kind of in this particular tier. I guess for me, I'm Laura Metcalf, but he still would be in this tier for me. I don't know. I'm really high on Tetairoa McMillan. I think that he can just be a superstar in the Carolina Panthers offense, so I would probably rank him higher.
I think he still belongs in this tier, but I think he belongs near the top of the tier. I'm with you. I'm really high on
that's
Ted
probably where I put him. And then the Chiefs guys are just, it's a matter of how many games you think Rice is going to get suspended. Really just depends.
Can we get an answer?
Like, that's really dependent on like where you rank Worthy, where you rank Rice, like all of that type of those types of movements. It's just dependent on where you want to put Rice. But yeah, I think for the most part, this tier is pretty spot on. Again, I think there are guys in the next tier that I would probably bring up. That's probably what I would say. I think that this tier continues to go on with some of the guys in tier 5, but there are pros and cons to a lot of these players. And I think that you look at this tier and you think that if you land one of these guys as your wide receiver 3, you think, oh man, this is awesome. But then if you get one as your wide receiver 2, you're like, maybe I don't feel as good as I would if he was my wide receiver 3. So I think it's kind of a make or break type of wide receiver tier. I'm interested to see who Jake is gravitating towards or fading.
I feel like, quickly before I toss it to you, Jake, like everybody from like McLaurin at 19 to Zay at 25 is, we might talk a lot about these guys because there's compelling cases to make pro and con, on these shows and throughout the offseason and in our rankings. But I feel like on draft day, that those group of receivers like will get no reaction from the rest of your league when those guys are picked. It's just like, yeah, this is like the guys that are in this range and they're fair and maybe they hit, maybe they don't. But like it doesn't seem that interesting like for the general public in terms of the conversation that I see online, which I think is interesting. It's later on the guys like Ted and the Chiefs guys that then you kind of get a lot more of the back and forth like debates online, at least that I've seen. I want to ask specifically, Jake, on Ted. Do you agree that he should maybe be ranked higher in this tier, or are you more nervous with him as a rookie?
I'm actually a few spots behind ADP just because, like, I believe he's going to get the volume. I believe he is the one. I believe Tetairoa McMillan is the best wide receiver on the Panthers. I believe that late season Bryce Young might be the Bryce Young we see in 2025, and that's college Bryce Young, that things started to turn. However, even with that improvement, we're still talking about somebody who is not going to be near the top in yards per completion. That's just not who Bryce Young is. He will take some shots downfield, but how this offense runs and how things are constructed around him. And I think McMillan can help open some of that up for him and improve that number. I'm just concerned that McMillan with Young needs that 160 kind of Malik Neighbors rookie season target-wise to get to wide receiver 1 status. And I'm not saying it can't happen. I just look at the fact that we're already like, oh, wow, other people are stepping up, in the fact that Thielen might be taking a step back as Coker takes a step up. And again, we were all impressed with him and excited for him last year, and I know he has some issues and then the injuries and everything like that, but I just think there's a lot of options on this team where Bryce Young's not going to be throwing 600 times. Bryce Young's not going to be completing 11, 12 yards, downfield every single time on average. So I just look at it and say, 130, 140 targets for McMillan, great rookie season, but does that get him to top 15, top 20? I don't know that it does. Also because of the touchdowns on this offense. Now, if this takes an enormous step forward and is the Buccaneers of last year, boom, out the window. McMillan's a wide receiver 1. So I think that's why it's a really good spot. Back to what Andrew said, is as your wide receiver 3, sign me up for him every single time, 100%. The top of the tier, Garrett Wilson would be in this group for me, but Garrett Wilson leads off the tier for me. Garrett Wilson, Worthy, Moore, There's a name that we're going to talk about later that is going to be my guy that's in this tier a lot. Some of those names I feel great as the top of the tier versus McMillan. I think McMillan could be at the top. I just think there's a little bit more risk with him versus a lot of these names we know. Worthy being the biggest one, again, to go back to what Andrew said. Like, we went through this roller coaster of like, oh, he's going to be suspended. Oh, it's going to be 2026. No, it's happening in 2025, and then pause. And like,
but
well,
not yet.
Yeah, like what the hell happened? Like we were just steamrolling ahead. Oh, it's happening all of a sudden, and then boom, nothing. Like I would just love an answer. Actually, I bring that up as a separate. Is like I said that back then. Is my biggest concern for Rice is that we end up with the Zeke situation. All of a sudden, he's suspended in the middle of the season, or even come playoff time. Like that's my fear. But as a complete aside. You know where I'm going. I'm surprised you didn't lead me with this, Worm, and ask the question. Zay Flowers does not deserve to be in this damn tier. Can we stop with Zay Flowers?
If you didn't bring it up, I was going to bring it up.
Zay Flowers, 10.1 and 10.4 fantasy points per game in his 2 seasons. Mind you, coming off a season where Lamar Jackson just threw 41 bleeping touchdowns, and the guy still couldn't finish inside the top 30 in fantasy points per game, still couldn't get over 10.4 fantasy points per game. I love Zay Flowers, the player. I was one of the highest on him coming out of college. I do not love Zay Flowers the Raven. I don't love wide receiver Ravens. Like, we've been doing this for years. And, like, you guys know this. How many times, like, if right now somebody's like, oh, DJ Moore's in the trade block, you know the first team everybody would say to send him to? The Ravens. Get him a number 1. They need a number 1 every single time. Get him a number 1. They play wide receiver. Like, take the wide out. They play receiver, including their tight ends, by committee. Andrews, when Likely is back. Now they have Hopkins, Bateman for games, Aguilar for Aguilar, however you say his damn name. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's just who they are. And that's, again, this is going back to the Wilson. That's okay that that's the truth. That's why you draft Lamar Jackson. That's why you draft Mark Andrews if you want a tight end. But stop with the wide receivers. If I can get Zay Flowers as wide receiver 33, cool. Checkbox every single time. I am not putting inside my top 25. I will die on that Branch Hill ship, whatever you want to call it.
If I was like the czar of these rankings and I could go in and say, I don't care what consensus says, I'm just going to kind of pick and choose and move guys around, the first move I would make is I would swap Zay Flowers and Calvin Ridley, who's in the next tier. I'm really high on Ridley.
That was my name.
And I thought it might have been, actually. I just, like, I'm with you. And, like, everybody always, I feel like all summer long, people on the shows with me have been like, now, Worm, I know you're a Ravens fan, so I'm sorry to say this, but I'm a little low on Zay. And I have to keep screaming, like, I am too. I don't get it. Like there is, like, just think about upside. Like, look at the names going after him: Ted McMillan, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, Erickson. You've been a big Jalen Waddle fan for a long time. Even George Pickens. Some people are really excited about his fit in Dallas. I'm like,
I will take all of them.
Just the ups. You can paint the upside picture for all of those guys. Zay is never, ever going to be a big touchdown guy in Baltimore. Maybe not anywhere. I don't know, but he will never. They are always going to either run it with Derrick Henry or they are going to throw it to the tight ends. That is the way they operate in the red zone. He needs big plays to score touchdowns. That is not changing. I will be shocked if he has 7 touchdowns this year. I'd be thrilled. I'd be happy to see it because I like him as a player, but I would be shocked. That upside is just not there, and there is no way in a low-volume passing offense that is also receiver by committee that he is going to get the catches and yards to make up for the lack of touchdowns. So, like, I'm not saying he's going to tank your season. He's a good player, but he does not belong as a borderline top 24 receiver here. He's too high.
Yeah, I want to bring up one more name, and I'm interested what Andrew thinks here. And I am one of the many champions. A lot of people do it, but I'm one of the many champions that don't overreact to preseason, don't overreact. However, I'm going to bring up a name where I'm starting to get more concerned, and I already had some. I have been saying that Marvin Harrison should have a better rapport and more rapport with Kyler Murray in year 2. Brought up the fact that jumping jack situation where he's wide open, that Kyler Murray maybe looks back to him a little bit sooner in year 2. But my concern is not Kyler Murray. It's the freaking Cardinals. Why do we have him running the 4 verts route every damn play? Like, it's Marvin Harrison, go, vertical, go. Like, give the guy something else. And I know part of the concern with Harrison, the very small concern with Harrison coming out of college was like, hey, maybe he needs to develop his route tree a little bit more and snap off a little bit quicker underneath and release a little bit quicker. But if the Cardinals are not going to let him even try and they're just going to keep sending him on these goes and downfield and everything like that, it's not going to get better for Ryan Harrison in year 2, where I've slid him back a couple spots. I would actually take Sutton in front of him at this point.
Erickson?
Yeah, I think that the Marvin Harrison Jr. case is really interesting because, again, the rookie year was disappointing based on the expectation coming in. It was really out of control, honestly, the expectation for him. And now he's cheaper than he was last year. It's a weird way to think that I think that he actually has a higher floor than potential ceiling, because if you just look at the role that he has in the Cardinals offense, going not to what he's doing on the field, like in terms of the routes he's running, but I would say that I would throw his hat in the ring of who could lead the NFL in routes run this year. Marvin Harrison Jr. would probably be up there as one of the guys that could run the most routes. So by putting him into that conversation, well, he's going to have a floor. Like, he's on the field every single play. He's the number 1 red zone target on the Cardinals passing offense. They play in they have the most dome games of any team playing in the NFL. So I think the floor is still kind of there for him. Again, he sees all the air yards. He has a lot of high value opportunities in the offense. And it's a matter of, okay, can his talent and the chemistry with Kyler Murray take him to the next level? So that's obviously the big question mark still, and that's why those that don't want to draft Marvin Harrison, because they don't think that can happen. I think that's accurate. I don't think that that's a crazy take to make, but I think that he still belongs in this tier for those reasons. But the floor,
yes,
I think, is not being talked about enough with Harrison versus, well, he's not going to hit the ceiling. He's not going to hit the ceiling. Well, maybe he doesn't, but I don't think that if you draft him wide receiver 18 and he finishes as wide receiver 24, that's not a major loss. And I still think you are betting on some type of season. Yeah, it's some type of leap just based like he's a receiver entering his second year. Like, we see guys take major leaps going from year 1 to year 2 all the time. And I did think it was interesting, at least in the preseason, where they were using Zay Jones a little bit more, and Zay Jones could be more of that vertical field stretcher. So if he's actually doing more of those vertical routes and they're letting Marvin Harrison Jr. eat a little bit more underneath, because last year it was him running all these vertical routes, that was kind of encouraging for me, not just his deployment, but
I would love
how
that.
they
But
use
did you
Zay
see,
Jones.
like, they were using Zay Jones more underneath and like the slots running outside and the out routes and stuff like that, and it's like, why aren't we doing this with Marvin? And that's why I bring it up. To your point is that they are using Zay a lot, but they're using Zay in more complete routes, which is just insane.
I did want to say, while we're on the topic of Zay, so great transition. So I didn't get to say I didn't get to talk about my flowers on Zay Flowers, essentially. So what I wanted to say with Flowers is, when you look at this tier from a talent perspective, wide receiver talent, do you think he belongs in this tier? Yes or no?
Like real life NFL
Yes,
receiver talent?
yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, but more back end. I think.
I'd agree with that. Yes, but on the back half of it. Yeah.
Who is the worst real life wide receiver in this tier, in your opinion?
Maybe.
Why are we coming taking shots?
No,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, like, they're not terrible. I mean, just of the guys, like, who do you think is probably the worst actual wide receiver?
Maybe Sutton. I don't know. I don't think there's an obvious standout.
I think for me it's probably Worthy, just because I think that he's still.
Well,
I mean,
Sutton
I want
and
to see
Worthy
more
were the
from
two
him.
I was picking between for my.
It'd probably be Worthy, but
I mean, if we're talking about complete wide receivers, Flowers is going to fall back into that conversation again.
So you're kind of low on him as a talent then too, because I think Flowers
liked him a lot at college.
Maybe Pickens, because he's been really up and down too. Is in the but there's a lot of good. There's a lot
Pickens
of good
is similar.
players.
So Pickens is similar to Flowers in the fact of, like, Pickens has limited ability and plays better outside. Flowers has limited full game ability. Like, when you say, I mean, we're going to go back to the other wide receivers. If we're talking the T. Higgins of the world, like, not even the tier 1 guys, but like Adams at this point of his career, like, they can play essentially all 3 wide receiver spots and succeed in all 3 spots. I think Flowers can work outside, but he's going to have limited ability. Pickens, you don't running inside from the slot a lot, is going to still work, but just not successfully. So I think that's where I'm going with Flowers. It's nothing against Flowers. It's just that his game is limited. Arguably, Ladd McConkey's game is limited.
Yeah.
So
I guess
you can
George
nitpick a lot of these wide
Pickens
receivers.
has 3 games in his career with at least 20 points in half PPR scoring. Only 3 times in 3 seasons.
So the only thing with Zay Flowers I just wanted to mention is because at the highest rate of we see new wide receiver ones break out, like finish as wide receiver ones for the first time, is year 3. And like Zay Flowers is entering year 4. So like that's what's always in the back of mind, because I agree with every point
but it's still the team. To go back to my point, you swap Zay Flowers and Ladd McConkey, swap their rankings.
Yeah, exactly. But because we can do that mentally, like I understand the situation with the Ravens right now, but there's a case in a season that happens where things can break in Zay Flowers' way, and maybe it was last year when that should have happened for him when Lamar threw for 40 plus touchdowns. But what if Bateman doesn't score as many touchdowns as he scored last year? What if Flowers does run better with some of these big play touchdowns, and he has that season? So again, I'm not saying that the price is justified because of the situation that we can see at play here. I agree that he's overvalued, but I don't think that those that are drafting Zay Flowers are making a bad bet on a year 3 receiver attached to a superstar quarterback taking another step forward in his 3rd season, because we've seen this story before with Zay Flowers or with year 3 receivers. So that's just something I wanted to point out.
You could jumpstart your research this fantasy draft season with the Fantasy Pros Draft Kit, your one-stop shop for expert rankings, players to target or avoid, wide receiver draft strategies, and more. Remember, winning your fantasy league starts before draft day, and the Fantasy Pros Draft Kit gives you the knowledge to do it right. Don't walk into draft day guessing. Read up, lock in, win your league. Go to fantasypros.com/kit. All right, Tier 5. It runs from wide receiver 31 to wide receiver 41. Calvin Ridley, Chris Olave, Travis Hunter, Jerry Jeudy, Roma Dunze, Jacoby Myers, Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Jordan Addison, Jawan Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall. Now, interestingly, I put this together yesterday afternoon, so less than 24 hours ago. In the time since I put this together to right now, the tiers did shift in the consensus rankings based on just experts updating their rankings. Calvin Ridley is now actually in the tier above. He is still wide receiver 31, but he is now closer enough to that tier that he is in tier 4 instead of tier 5. That's where he belongs. I know, Jake, obviously you agree. Erickson, I assume you agree. I haven't asked you. You can argue how much higher he deserves to be on the rankings. Like I said, I would move him up several spots. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But he clearly belongs with the names we just discussed, not the names that we are about to discuss in this tier. Erickson, are you in agreement with Jake and me?
Yeah, I mean, I think Calvin really is the exact what we thought about Sutton and McLaurin from last year, where they both had rookie quarterbacks and then both took steps. I mean, it's the same thing. Like what those guys did last year. That's what Calvin Ridley's going to do this year. Like that's what I would say.
Jake, where do you have Ridley ranked specifically? I know he's in the next tier up, but where is he?
Yeah, tune into the short form podcast for my long take on Calvin Ridley. I have him 22. Like Calvin Ridley disrespect needs to stop.
I've been getting a lot of trade offers for him in a dynasty league where I am contending. Like people are seeing the upside with Ridley and are interested in him. So
my one concern, and I will say this, and I don't know that I'll bring this up in the short form. That's why I was bringing it up now. Is that we see this every year is wide receivers or players in general that are underrated, and we as an industry start talking about them. And it's so many people are like, oh, underrated, and everybody starts moving them up, and then people are like, well, I still want to be the leader on him. I still want to prove that I was the guy that was highest. And then all of a sudden you get to the last week of August when a lot of people have their drafts, and somebody's got Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 15, and they go into their home league, and they're like, well, I got to take Calvin Ridley in round 4 because he's so underrated, and then you throw out every possible bit of upside. So don't make that mistake. If you get to the end of August and you're listening to this show or you remember this show and all of a sudden Calvin Ridley is like, oh, I got to take him around 4, don't do that. Like, as much as somebody who loves Calvin Ridley, don't take him around 4.
Do you guys think that the 3-game suspension for Jordan Addison is enough to bump him down to this tier, or would you still, because he was in tier 4 prior to that, and 3 games isn't nothing, but if you can cover with a backup receiver option for 3 games, and then for most of the season, you have a guy that was in tier 4 prior to this update, or do you think he belongs here based on the fact that he's number 2 in the offense and it's an unknown at quarterback with J.J. McCarthy, and then throw on the suspension on top of that? Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I've had him in this tier, so I think that's kind of more. And it comes down to I have a little bit more concern than McCarthy on some people. Like, oh, he's the quarterback whisperer with Kevin O'Connell and that type of stuff. But hey, you know what? Sometimes it doesn't always work out perfectly, and McCarthy can have a very good season and still not have the touchdown success that Sam Darnold did, and still have a good season. Like, what if it's only 23 touchdowns? Still a good season by the rookie, quote unquote. I put that in quotes because it's not a true rookie, but a rookie season for McCarthy. But you also have a healthy Hockenson, which I'm not drafting any of Hockenson because I feel like he is the 3rd option behind Addison. But you're losing those 3 games, and yes, it is easiest to make up for those 3 games at the beginning of the season. But I just think there's a lot here where if Jefferson's going to be Jefferson, and I do believe that he can be Jefferson, even with McCarthy, even if McCarthy got hurt in week 1 and had to turn to the scrubs, like Jefferson's still going to be Jefferson. It's my concern of Addison and Hawkinson kind of like cannibalizing each other a little bit. And now that you have a little bit more of a run balance, and I don't think they're all of a sudden going to be run focused like a Greg Roman offense, but I do think you see the talk up of Jordan Mason, which we've talked a lot about on these shows, and you have Mason and Aaron Jones taking their splits out of the backfields and probably much like a Steelers situation with Harris and Warren. I just don't know the volume is going to be high enough. Like, I would not bet the over on 560 pass attempts for Jerry J. McCarthy this year.
Erickson, what are you doing with Addison?
He's really tricky because I'm not exactly sure how many usable weeks you're going to get out of him. So he's suspended for the first 3 weeks of the season, and then the Vikings play on the road 2 international games back to back. So he's getting thrown back into another really kind of weird situations. Now, we don't know if he'll be limited coming back. Now, he's not injured, but let's say the Vikings ground game is really cooking. Are we just going to throw Jordan Addison back in the back? Right? Now let's turn to a pass-heavy offense when we're playing all the international games. So there's not really routine structured. And Addison, again, he's gotten in trouble before, and he's away from the facility for 3 weeks. Is he going to be in tip-top? Like, what is he going to be doing with his time? Is he going to be in tip-top shape? Maybe. Or maybe he's going to be goofing off, eating Cheetos on the couch. I don't know. So I have some reservations about how confident I'll be. I'm, like, thinking about start-sit questions week 4. People are like, do I start Jordan Addison off the suspension? I'm like, we need information about his role. Is he going back to, yes, 100% of the snaps, good to go. Okay, maybe we can play him in this matchup. And then the Vikings have a week 6 bye week. So he's definitely not playing that week. So depending on how your roster's kind of shaken out, you may not be able to feel confidently start him maybe once week 5, and then he's on a bye week the next week. So I find myself just looking in other directions. I think that during the beginning of the season, your bench slots are so critical and so crucial to have space to make waiver wire moves. And yes, Addison is a former first-round pick who's popped off the last couple of years, a lot of touchdown production. But to the other points that Jake made about the offense with McCarthy, I think there's enough negatives with Addison's just his early season projection where I'm kind of shying away unless he dramatically falls, in which case I think he's just too good of a receiver. Just okay, he's free at this point. I can just throw him on a team with a larger bench. I think he makes sense there, especially because you can get some receivers to fill the gap, like a Keenan Allen to start the year if you need immediate production while you wait for Addison to return.
Who else in this tier, besides Calvin Ridley, Jake, stands out to you as a target that you want to be getting in drafts? If there's a guy that's must have in every draft, sure, but just guys that you are higher on and want to be getting as much of as you can.
I forget all of the names that you mentioned, so I'm kind of looking right now. And was Odunze in this group? I feel like he is.
I'll read them again quickly for everybody. Calvin Ridley, Chris Olave, Travis Hunter, Jerry Jeudy, Roma Dunze, Jacoby Myers, Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Jordan Addison, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, okay. So there's 2 including. I would say those are the 3. Is Odunze, and then the other 2 are the ones on their team in what we assume are going to be terrible quarterback situations, but they're still the ones, and that being Jeudy and Olave. I've been getting a decent share of them, and I know that we have Flacco and whether or not he's going to be the quarterback for how long or whatever. But I still think that Jeudy as a wide receiver 3, we're talking about somebody that just had his finally had his breakout as a wide receiver 2, but you're getting him as a 3. You're getting Olave, who's put up top 22 numbers, depending on your scoring. I wanted to try and include all formats in that. But you're also getting him as a wide receiver 3 with that shook Rattler mess of a situation. And again, if they were wide receiver 2s, I'd be out. But they're 3s, and they're the number 1s on their team. But I'll go to Dunze because it comes down to kind of like the Flowers argument. Do you believe in the talent? I still believe in Odunze's talent. I have argued that he made some of his own problems to his credit last year. Some of it was poor route running at times. Some of it was consistency, concentration drops that he had. His dad getting involved, which was a lot of fun. But if we're talking about the talent and the ability to break out in year 2, and with an offense that we all are assuming is going to be better with Ben Johnson, we're assuming Caleb Williams will take a step forward and look like the Caleb Williams we saw in college, more so his second to last season than his last season. But all that upside there is if Odunze broke out and was a top 20 wide receiver, I don't think we'd be shocked. Kind of have a Jameson Williams type of situation, but more on a lesser depth of target and more of a consistency with his receptions, basically catching more than 55% of his balls. I think Odunze could, not even surprised, just easily get inside the top 25. That being said, I think there's a lot of risk with Odunze. I think there's a lot of risk with the Bears offense in general. We're all just assuming Ben Johnson's going to fix and make everything great, and that's not a guarantee. I'm investing, but let's also understand there's risk here.
Investing responsibly, Jake.
Yes.
Erickson, any standouts here for you? I mean, Pearsall is a popular breakout candidate. Stephon Diggs, number one
Like him
target for Drake May. Jacoby Myers, perpetually underrated. Travis Hunter, like number 2 pick in the draft if he's playing on offense. Who stands out to you?
Yeah, so I really like Ricky Pearsall, Slick Rick. I think that he's teed up, right? His second season, and I know that Jake really likes him too, so we'll do more of the long form a little bit later with him. But Pearsall stands out to me as a target. I don't like a lot of the veterans in this group, to be honest. Like, Diggs, I get it. Like, he looks great in camp, but I just think it's going to be a different... I don't know if it's going to be the same. It's going to translate to the actual NFL field. Like, he's also a 31-year-old coming off a torn ACL. So I know that it looks great in practice, but I think that he's going to be the prototypical catch the ball and fall down. Like, he's going to convert third. Like, I just don't think he's going to offer more than that. And it's then, is he getting touchdowns? And how often are the Patriots throwing the football? So I think that he's fine where he's going, but I think that it's kind of one of these situations where he's good, but could we do better? Like that's kind of the way I view Diggs. I'm like, I think he's fair valued here, but could we do better? And I look at a guy like Pearsall, like I'll take the shot on a second-year guy, like having a major breakout. That's the route that I would rather go into. I like Odunze a lot. And then Travis Hunter. I mean, look, if he gets the usage that he got in preseason week 1, where he's playing full-time as a starter on offense, that dude's going to crush this ADP. So I would be very aggressive drafting Travis Hunter right now because we're getting more of the answers, the questions answered about his usage in this offense, and he's playing in the slot. That means he's going to have a very favorable targets rate per route run. So it's a matter of they're letting him play all the snaps that he can handle, and so far they're open to it, and I think the fantasy manager should be open to it too. And yes, get Travis Hunter on your fantasy teams.
Let's not skip past one of the names you brought up, Worm, though, too. If you want Zay Flowers with more production at a cheaper cost, just draft Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, that's also a pretty good point.
Tier 6, a lot of names here. We're not going to hit on all of these because we went long on Zay Flowers, but I'll read them through here so everybody knows the names we're talking about. Deebo Samuel, Jaden Reed, Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Emeka Egbuka, Cooper Kupp, Darnell Mooney, Brandon Ayuk, Keon Coleman, Rashid Shaheed, Matthew Golden, Christian Kirk, Rashad Bateman, Luther Burton, Cedric Tillman. Again, this is Tier 6 in the consensus rankings. So if those are a lot of names to track, you can follow along at fantasypros.com/rankings. Who stands out here? Obviously, like the downside isn't as relevant when we get later into the drafts, Jake, because you're picking late anyway. So who has the upside that you like? Is it one of these rookies, a guy like Egbuka or Golden? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, we can just start there then. So you like the rookies?
Yes.
So I like one of the two rookies more than the
Egbuka.
other. I am a
you
huge
like Golden.
Egbuka fan.
Okay.
Yes, I am a huge Egbuka talent fan. I just, if you told me Godwin was a non-factor this season, Egbuka would be pushing my top 30, if not higher. Probably my top 20. Just to make that clear of what I think of him. When is Godwin back? Is he starting the season in a few weeks to ramp up? Is he out for the entire month of September? So I think that's what it is. And when Godwin's back, I think that's just going to be a factor. I am a big fan of Godwin or Golden being the number 1 on the Packers. I don't think that Golden is a number 1 NFL wide receiver, but I do think he needs to be the number 1 Packers wide receiver. And I think that Dobbs will see some of the downfield ability. We'll talk about him too more later. But we've already seen some concentration drops from him, like the inconsistency. Jaden Reed, like they just don't want to use that situation more than 60-70% of the time. So I think that Golden can be the final answer to, hey, what if Christian Watson stayed healthy? Like, what if we got somebody to actually be the 80% of the snaps on the field instead of 60-65%? So I'm a big fan of Golden. The other one is a rookie that deserves to be here. I'm going to bring him up on every show I possibly can until it happens. Jaden Higgins is going to be, and it is already, the number 2 on the depth chart alongside Nico Collins. My colleague Dane Brugler compared Higgins to Collins. I thought that was lofty, but I compared him to Marvin Jones, which I bring up Marvin Jones to say, even if he is just Marvin Jones, he's a wide receiver 3, and if CJ Stroud is anything like he was 2 years ago, Jaden Higgins is going to make a case to be the best wide receiver rookie not named Hunter or McMillan. And he deserves to be in this tier with Golden.
Erickson, what do you think? Both on the guys in this tier, and is there somebody that, like Higgins, you thought belonged in this tier?
I think that Keenan Allen belongs in this tier. And he's just buried
Now that he's
across
back with the Chargers.
ADP. Yeah, so I think that he's going to be free that you can get in drafts, and he's a really easy guy you can plug and play. He's going to get a decent amount of target. I mean, that's Justin Herbert's guy. So I think that he's going to get a decent amount of volume. So I think that he should be brought up into this tier, although he is kind of like one of those kind of forgotten veterans. I still love Jaden Reed. Like, still my guy. I think that he's just a super talented player, and I know that now he's a foot injury, so he'll be even cheaper probably when you draft. So, again, I just think that he's going so far at a discount despite being super efficient over the last 2 years. Entering year 3, we see our year 3 breakouts at receiver very, very often, and I don't think that his skill set necessarily overlaps with Matthew Golden. So I think there's a situation where a lot of these Packers players, especially these Packers receivers, they're all being discounted too heavily when they're attached to Jordan Love, who, again, last year he was injured. 2 years ago, before that he threw over 30 touchdowns, 4,200 passing yards. Yeah, we can have a lot of fantasy production, I think, from this Packers passing game. So I think that investing in the Green Bay offense is a good way to get some strong return on the investment.
I think for me, the guy that is not in this tier that I think maybe belongs in it is the guy at the top of the next tier that we're not going to talk about, Marvin Mims. I have bought into the upside case there, and he's wide receiver 58 right now. I just think that's too low.
They took the training wheels off in the preseason game. He was out there playing full complement of snaps. So
if we see that in season, like that'll be awesome, obviously, and like just the upside there compared to some of the names ahead of him, that are like Christian Kirk. I would just rather take Marvin Mims than Christian Kirk right now, among other people. So, but there are some interesting names here, like Keon Coleman as an upside swing. If Rashad Bateman ever gets volume, though I don't think he will. Luther Burden was a hyped rookie as well that we didn't really talk about, kind of with Egbuka and Golden. Cedric Tillman had a couple amazing games last year. There are people out there who really like Josh Downs. So there's some really interesting names kind of in this tier and beyond. Before we wrap up, any kind of final overarching thoughts, Jake, on just your approach to the wide receiver position this year? Like, do you want to get guys early? Do you want to try and take advantage of depth? Do you want to just like play the board as it lies? What's your approach to the position?
So, no, it's actually, I was going to tie into that last point that you just made, that I just want to make sure everybody always remembers the biggest mistake, I think, and I got asked this, and I don't remember what show I was doing. It's like, what do you think the biggest mistake people do is? It was actually, I met at the Athletic. We met with a team meeting, and like I had to do a whole panel. So like a panel of one, I guess. It's not really a panel, but they're like, what do you think the biggest mistake people make is? And I said, wasting their bench out of the draft, because too many times people are like, oh, I'll draft blank whatever because I know he'll get me 8 points at running back or wide receiver, but especially at wide receivers. If the guy's ceiling is wide receiver 40, he should never touch your damn roster. Like, stop. Like, Wan'Dale Robinson, 150 targets to finish as wide receiver 44. Like, stop. Why are you drafting him? Where's the ceiling? So it was kind of that last point you made, is like there's a lot of names in here where you could paint scenarios. Like Keon Coleman, he has to worry about Joshua Palmer, but Khalil Shakir's hurt. Probably doesn't play until week 1. Is he opening a path to finally be the Keon Coleman we saw in college? It'll be inconsistent, but could he be an inconsistent top 30, 35 wide receiver? Yes. Could Darnell Mooney? We saw it last year. He's hurt right now, but like we saw it last year, the upside that you have to play there. So paint yourself the picture inside your head. Like, is this player in a scenario where blank happens and he finishes top 30? That's probably what I would shoot at for wide receiver, top 25, 30 at running back. If so, absolutely draft them. Draft a bunch of them, 3 or 4 of them, running backs and wide receivers at the end of your bench. If there's no path to that, if their best case scenario is wide receiver 40, do not draft them. Don't waste your time. You're just going to be the first guy you drop anyway.
Erickson, what are your kind of final thoughts on approaching the position?
I think in the beginning we talked about the very top is deep. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to get a guy that maybe could have a wide receiver 1 overall finish in his projection. I think that going towards those players, especially if you're just not confident with some of the top running backs, like a lot of these guys have some concerns, especially from the older players. So if you don't want to deal with it, you don't want to be, on the Saquon versus CMC wars, you don't want to be on that battlefield, just draft a receiver instead. Like, whatever, I don't care. I'll just take receivers, be happy with that decision. So I think that's the way to approach it. I love the middle tier in that wide receiver. It's like wide receiver 20 through 30 range, where it's like a lot of make or break guys, and I want at least one pick in that range. Kind of, it's probably between like rounds 4, 5, 6. I want to take a stab on one of these players. I think that we're going to see a major level jumper in that. I think it's the tier 4 to down to tier 5 that we were talking about earlier. I think there are some massive level jumpers in that tier, and I think you should be open to taking at least 1 or 2 guys. So allocate your positions with your draft accordingly so that you can draft receivers in that range and not necessarily take running backs in that range. I think that you're going to get better investments from these receivers. And in the later rounds, I think it's important to recognize and ask yourself the question, am I going to know when to start this guy on a team? Because I know that coming from a lot of the best ball drafts, it's easy for me to be like, oh, I'll just draft this guy, get all the spike weeks. It's great. I don't have to worry about starting these players. But remember, you need targets to start. So if you look at a player and you think, man, this guy's super boomer bust, they may cause you more headache than actual production, because if you don't know ever when to start said player, and this can obviously change during the season as roles kind of change, but if you're never going to be confident with a player, then he's not helping you on your roster. So really think about that when you're taking some of these shots on later players. And if anything, take shots on more players with question marks about them that maybe you get answered in week 1. Like for Marvin Mims' example, if Marvin Mims comes out in week 1, has that full-time role, you're cooking. We're feeling great about it. But if he comes out in the preseason was all a myth and it doesn't matter, he comes out and plays 20% of the snaps, you know who's getting cut from your roster? Marvin Mims right off the top. So I think that having those type of thought exercises is important.
I kind of like having guys that are easy to cut, though, because that's always the toughest
Well,
part.
that's what I mean. Yeah, you want to know that. It's like, all right, I'm done with this guy. I can move on.
Yeah. Well, you've heard our wide receiver rankings. Now build your own. The Cheat Sheet Creator is your personal guide to perfect league-specific rankings. Visualize your path to victory as you add tiers and tag your busts, breakouts, or sleepers. Sync your league to craft custom rankings, ensuring every pick is strategic and tailored to your league settings. Sync your league and enter your draft with confidence using the Cheat Sheet Creator at fantasypros.com/sheet or on the Fantasy Football Draft Wizard app. Try it for free right now by claiming your 3-day trial of Fantasy Pros Premium at fantasypros.com/premium. Guys, we'll go ahead and wrap things up there for Jake and Erickson. I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.